How's it going, guys? Strife here, and today I want to go over my Mesmer build that some people have been asking for. So first off, I consider Mesmer to be the third tier 1 class, along with Warrior and Guardian, for PvE dungeons, especially in a dedicated group. Mesmer brings a lot to the heavy armor party, a lot of utility that they don't have, and then of course Time Warp is really good for bursting down both bosses during speedruns and then DPS check events. So along with that, you're carrying on the theme of Berserker armor just because it's so powerful for PvE dungeons. And since Mesmer is a light armor class, I don't even bother balancing any survivability with Knight's gear for toughness, just because they already have 10% less armor. And they do have more options with their ranged options, illusions, blinks. They have invulnerability with like sword and their F4. So they can get away with full Berserker. So as far as my armor goes, I have ruby orbs socketed in. I'm just using the Flame Legion set. You can get Berserker from, you can craft it, or you can get it from COF, COE, or Ara tokens. For my weapons, I'm using Sigil of Accuracy in my sword, and then on my focus, I'm using Bloodlust right now if you don't like stacking sigils because you find you're getting downed a lot, or you're in a pug where you get downed a bit more. You can use something like Sigil of Force or even Sigil of Night, depending on which dungeons you're doing, since I believe 4 of the 8 dungeons are at night. For your offhand switch, you're going to want your ranged option with Greatsword. In my Greatsword, I have Sigil of Energy. I always like having that extra dodge to escape bad situations. And also the added benefit for Mesmer, depending on your traits, is you're going to spawn an illusion every time you dodge, which is really key for most PvE builds. So I'll go over that later. Then Jewelry again, Berserker. I got lucky enough to get my Ascended gear since I was farming with Guardian and Warrior. So if you do, of course you want that in Berserker as well. And then underwater you don't fight that much, so I just use my extra AC tokens and threw Sigil of Force in there. Can't really do any exotic. And same thing with the weapons that you don't usually use. It's good to have them as backups. Like running through trash, I'll equip Staff instead of Greatsword just because it has the Blink and the Chaos Armor buff, where Greatsword doesn't really have anything. And then I'll use like Scepter a lot more for WVW. And sometimes your pistol offhand is good for more range damage. And then real quick, over at Crit Chance, it's actually 59% because the Sigil of Accuracy doesn't show up on the tooltip, 99% crit damage, and then once you're using like Almond Berry Pies and you have warriors in the group giving you Fury, that's going to shoot up above 80% crit chance, so quite a bit for PvE. Alright, so as far as traits go, there's 2 primary builds that you can run as a Berserker Mesmer. There's one that's more like Phantasm and utility based, and the other one is a Shatter build. So I'll go over what I do first. They both kind of start out the same. Both builds usually do 20-20. For the Domination line, you're going to take Mind Rack, causes 20% more damage, because in either build you're still going to be shattering. Just one you'll be focusing more on shattering. So the 20% more damage is really good. This minor trait is really good as well. Every time you use your F3 shatter to daze, you're going to cause 5 stacks of vulnerability per illusion. So you can build 15 stacks with 3 illusions, which is really good like before Time Warp if you're in a group that doesn't have a lot of vuln stacking. And then for the other skill, you just use illusions inflict 15% more damage, especially if you're like a more Phantasm based build, because this applies to Phantasms as well. The other thing you can do if you do run Greatsword, which I don't like because it's lower DPS than normal sword, is this Greatsword training. And then going down to dueling. So dueling's good because it's one of the lines that gives you crit chance and crit damage, so some people actually do 10 and 30 as well. But as far as your major traits go, of course you're going to take blade training. If you are using sword, it's going to give you more, like 2 to 3% more crit chance depending on how your build is going to round up. And then of course the cooldown as well. And then for the other dueling trait, this in my opinion is one of the best traits that Mesmer has no matter what build you are. Every time you dodge, you are going to create an illusion. So that's good for shattering, it's good for just hanging up mobs as they kill your illusion, stuff like that. And then you'll also do more damage with another trait I'm going to talk about below. When you do get down to inspiration, this is where things change a bit between the shatter build and the phantasm utility build. If you are going the shatter build, you're not going to take inspiration, you'll probably do 30 into illusions. But for my build, I go 20 into inspiration. One, because you get a lot of utility with the first 10 points. You can have the glamour skills recharge 20% faster, which is going to be a lot of your more useful skills. So you're going to get the option of feedback cooldown, portal cooldown, and veil cooldown. And then when you're not using glamour skills, I'll switch to Mender's Purity, which removes a condition. It's basically your condition removal every 20 seconds on your heal. And then the other thing you can do is Vigorous Revelation. I don't really use it for my group because we don't need it, but if your group does need more vigor, you can use that as well. And then going up to the 20 line, the main reason you take this line in the first place is the Focus, Cooldown, and Reflect projectiles, which I will show you in the gameplay part of this guide. And then finally for your 10 points, I go 10 into illusion. Some people like to go 25 into inspiration for 15% more damage on phantasms. I don't think it's really that valuable if you are running an organized like dungeon group in full berserker armor, because the benefit you get of going 10 in illusions to get 3% more damage for each active illusion is a lot more valuable. If you have 3 illusions up, that's 9% more damage. If you have 3 illusions up and then cast like a time warp, you're going to get a huge benefit from this skill. Whereas if you're just using the phantasms do 15% more damage and running a great sword build like mine, you're probably only going to get the damage from 1 berserker and then 1 warden, and then you're going to shatter it because it'll probably die before it'll get a chance to recast the skills. This can be a bit more valuable if you're using like a pistol build and keeping a bunch of phantasms at range. But for the build I run, I like going 10 in illusions because of my playstyle. So real quick, if you were to go a shatter build like I was mentioning, you would put the 30 points in illusion instead. The reason you would do that is to take illusionary persona to get the extra basically shatter. So if you're up against a mob and you do mind rack, it's actually 4 times illusion, so you do more damage. And then for your other major trait, a lot of people will take either, you can recharge your shatter skills to get more mind racks and like an extra distortion to stay alive, or you're going to take, 10% higher crit chance with mind rack as well when you're casting a lot of mind racks for damage. So that's your option for a shatter build. So out here I'm going to go over the weapons and skills of Mesmer a bit more. So the sword is going to be your primary weapon just because it offers the highest DPS over time, and it also is your only weapon that cleaves, so it's faster for burning down groups of mobs when you're speedrunning. So here the main melee attack, auto attack, is going to put vulnerability, which increases your party's damage as well. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really good for stripping boons off of enemies that do have them. Blurred Frenzy you're going to use instead of a dodge, so instead of losing out on DPS by dodging, you'll actually be hitting the mob while being invulnerable for 2 seconds. So this is basically invulnerable, or a dodge rather, every 10 seconds. Then your third skill is the Illusion. This is just going to, as you can see, cripple the enemy when you send it out, and you can actually swap positions with it and then immobilize, so it's good for getting close to mobs, chasing mobs, or even if you are in a different position and need to dodge an attack, you can swap positions with it. So here you'll see the first 2 hits unbuff crit for 12 to 1300, and then the last hit for about 22 to 2300. If I send out my illusion here, you'll see I can swap positions with it, and then I can Blurred Frenzy, which does pretty decent damage, especially since you are invulnerable, and again it cleaves, so I can hit both of these mobs here. On your Focus 5, this is your Phantasm. It actually offers some of the highest DPS over the course that it's alive. The thing is, it's not a big burst attack, so if you are fighting something that's killing your illusions quickly, it's not going to be as good as some of your other Phantasms that have really high burst damage. And then your other skill for Focus is going to be the Temporal Curtain. It's going to give you swiftness, cripple mobs, and then I'll get into this more a bit later for using it for positioning, which is the most valuable probably thing that it does. Switching to your secondary weapon, Greatsword is going to be your ranged weapon, so what you can swap to if you are in danger in melee range and need to back off and heal a bit. There's also a few bosses where you will need to range. But Greatsword offers really good burst damage, so compared to a sword over like a 4 to 5 second fight on a single target mob, it actually is pretty comparable. The difference is that the auto attack is much less DPS and it's single target. So over the course of a longer boss fight or a group of silver mobs, it's inferior to the sword DPS. The other thing is that Greatsword, it's not as good in Time Warp just because the auto attack is so much lower, and the fact that it doesn't have the vulnerability on auto attack like the sword does, where you can stack it really quickly in a Time Warp. So in most instances you do want to stay in sword range when you're running PvE dungeons, especially when you have like a guardian to relieve pressure off of the DPS classes. So here you'll see, usually what I'll do is at the start of a fight I'll equip Greatsword, I'll throw out Mirror Blade, then my Berserker, and then Mind Stab. So as you can see, that's a big amount of burst damage. But once those things die, the auto attack, so you can see it's really not as much damage as the sword. The auto attack's slower, and over the sword cycle, the sword's going to offer more DPS. But with Berserker, which does a lot of upfront damage, I think it does like all its damage around 4 to 5k in the course of a second, compared to Warden, which takes like 3 to 4 seconds. It can be good for getting that burst out. And then both Mind Stab and Mirror Blade do comparable damage to the third, the higher auto attack on the sword. So by throwing all these out really quickly, you'll get that great burst potential from the Greatsword. Then you can go in and get the higher sustained DPS from the normal sword. Mirror Blade, it also bounces up to 3 times, so you can hit a mob 2 times, or multiple mobs once, or like 2 mobs twice. So that does offer some good burst as well. Your last basically attack or damage move for PvE is going to be your Shatters. So if I throw out 3 illusions here and then shatter them, you'll see it's about 2k per illusion, 2 to 2.5 usually. So it's really good for that burst as well, especially like at the end of fights when you know you're not going to need your illusions up, and then again you want to time it before your illusions die if you are keeping them up for that 3% bonus damage. As far as utilities go, so you have a lot of utilities that are good most of the time. So like Decoy is one of the things I'll run because you always want a Stun Breaker, and the fact that it gives you an illusion and stealths you to relieve aggro from yourself if you do pull it is really good. Your other Stun Breaker that you have is Mirror Images. I'll equip this when I'm like DPS bursting down an easy boss where I don't need many utilities, just to keep clones up, to keep shattering and using it for the 3% illusion trait, 3% damage. Your third Stun Breaker is going to be Blink, which is really good for running past mobs and getting past traps to be used in conjunction with your portal. So like the COF1 Flaming Ball Trap or the Laser Trap Room in COE. It's good for getting your group across if they're not as good at some of the like trap rooms in dungeons. Feedback's another really good skill that is up that I'll have on my bar most of the time. Whenever you're fighting stuff with ranged projectiles, this will give you that invulnerability to range for 6 seconds. It's also really good for like GL, the Arabos, Giganticus Lupicus, because in phase 2 and 3 you can actually reflect his projectiles for a ton of damage. Other good skills, Arcane Thievery and Signet are really good in conjunction as well. I'll usually use Thievery when you need to steal boons from bosses that have long durations or a lot of boons. So something like the jellyfish in the underwater fractal that has 25 stacks of might, or like the Ascalon captain, or the dredge in the dredge fractal that put protection on them. You can steal those and spread it to your party with Signet of Inspiration. Inspiration's also really good before you're gonna DPS burst a boss, and you have like 3 warriors in your group. You can have them use 4 Great Justice, so you get 9 stacks of might and like 30 seconds of fury uptime, and then you'll spread that to your group and basically double their might stacks and double the fury duration. So that's really good for bursting stuff down. You'll get 18 stacks of might even before the fight starts. And then the only mantra I ever use really is Mantra of Concentration. Concentration, this is going to be basically your only source of stability, and it breaks your stuns as well. So like in the GL fight again for the bubble in phase 3, or running through parts of Raw Path 2, you're just going to charge it up. Once it's charged, you'll get these two charges on your bar, which are pretty much insta-cast, and they'll be up on your bar as long as you don't zone out of a dungeon or get downed. So you'll see I'll be running, and say you get hit by something that stuns you or you need to get out of with stability, you can quickly just pop it and you'll get stability for the 2 seconds. And then once you use both, the timer will go on. Null Field can be really good. I don't use it as much personally because I run in a group with Guardians and Warriors, so the Guardians have Soldier Runes and the Warriors have Shake It Off, so usually that's enough condition and it's more practical. But if you are in a group or in a fight that has a lot of conditions, you can use this for constant condition removal for 7 seconds. And then last skill that I use a lot, Veil, is really good. It relieves releases the aggro when you're running through trash. So a lot of times you want to use it at the end of a run, not at the beginning, because you'll see in some of my videos, like my raw videos on my Mesmer, you'll use it to release aggro after runs, so you don't actually have to fight anything. It's really good for like COE Path 2 and 3, running from the cannon event to the second subject alpha fight. You can actually run through everything and then Veil at the end, and you won't have to fight the Wraith or the Berserkers that don't normally leash before subject alpha. So that's good as well. And then as far as the Focus Pull and Illusionary Wave, the knockback for Greatsword, I didn't get into that as much, but we're actually going to switch to another area now. And I'll show you one of the major utilities that Mesmer brings, which is positioning mobs and dragging them around without aggroing them. So we'll get to that next. Alright, so here I am in a raw dungeon. I wanted to show you some focus pull techniques because in my opinion, the Mesmer focus pull is the best AoE pull in the game. There's really only this in the Greatsword Guardian pull. But a lot of times I'm running with pugs or just other Mesmers in general, and I don't see them use the focus pull, especially when they're using focus in the first place, and it just makes me cringe because it is so valuable. So as you can see here, there is a group of 4 silver mobs. When the hunter is in the group and you aggro it, it casts stability, meaning you can't run in there with the Guardian to pull with Greatsword. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the focus down without getting aggro. Once I place it down by the wall, I'm just going to pull them together. So what this allows you to do is group up the mobs nicely, so when you run in, you can get maximum DPS from AoEs and cleave damage from your heavy melee group. So that's one example of using the wall to focus pull things into it and not aggro them. Alright, so over here I'm going to show you how to pull when you don't have a wall. So normally when you put the Temporal Curtain down for the focus pull, it's going to pull them roughly 500 range towards the center of the curtain. So when you don't have a wall, you have to basically know where to place it, so you'll group the mobs together. So here I placed it 500 range, and then I'm pulling them together. You can see they grouped up right on top of each other because of the distance that I pulled them with the focus. So I'm going to go aggro them real quick to reset their position. Now if you place the temporal curtain in the wrong position, it's going to keep pulling them towards the middle of it, but it'll still pull them the same range, so they'll actually go through the middle of the curtain and past each other, and you won't group them up like that. So as you can see, that wasn't very useful because they're pretty much in the same spot, just a little bit closer now, and you didn't successfully group them up. So you do want to make sure, just through practice, knowing where to place the curtain to group mobs up the best. And then the last thing I want to show you real quick is you can combine it with the number 5 skill on your greatsword that actually pushes mobs back. So here I'm going to run up and push the mob into the other mob. So we're going to get the mage into the illusionist here. So with this you can actually push mobs and then pull them to group up maybe multiple groups that wouldn't normally be able to be pulled together. So here I'm going to push the mage in, and then say there was another group on the left here, I could then pull them all together. So then you would get, so like any AoE skill, it pulls up to 5 mobs, so you could pull like a group of 2 with a group of 3 there, for instance. So hopefully this helps out with using the focus a bit more. It's a pretty valuable weapon for your utility. So the last thing I wanted to show you is how the Temporal Curtain Focus 4, how the reflection works. So a lot of people ask about this, but the way Temporal Curtain works is it's not a wall. So if I put Temporal Curtain like in the middle of this harpy, you can see that the arrows still get through and hit me. The way projectiles work in this game is they reach a low point right before they hit your body, and since Temporal Curtain is a ground target skill, you want to put it directly in front of you to reflect projectiles. So you'll see it in a few of my videos, but once this harpy comes down, you'll see I'll put my curtain directly in front of me, and now the projectiles are reflecting back at him. So that's basically the placement you want to put your temporal curtain. You don't want to put it in front of the mob or in the middle of the mob. You want to put it like right on your party, basically right in front of them, to reflect projectiles. And then the other thing I did want to show you is when running through trash in dungeons. I mentioned I'll usually equip like my staff instead of my greatsword because greatsword doesn't really have anything that is useful for running through stuff. So the way your phase retreat works is just like it says, you teleport away from the target, but if you're actually running past the target, so here I'm going to aggro this larva. So normally I'll cast it and it'll teleport me away from the mob and spawn my clone. But if I'm running this way in front of the mob, you can, as long as you have something targeted, you'll cast it and teleport forward. So that can be useful when trash running, as well as the short duration on chaos armor if you do get something useful. So like protection there. So those two skills are why I equip staff over greatsword. So hopefully this guide did give you a good overview on what the Mesmer brings to a PvE dungeon group, especially in a more organized group. Now there's a lot of things that you're just going to get from experience and actually playing the Mesmer, which I'm still learning as well. But for me personally, the Mesmer does have a different playstyle than Guardian and Warrior, so it is a nice change of pace sometimes. Between like their shatter skills, their managing your invulnerabilities, and constantly swapping utilities depending on the event or dungeon, there's a lot more micro involved. And then along with that, you do want to manage your illusions as well and know when to shatter them before they die. So those are things that I'm still practicing, and you'll just get more experience from actually playing the class. As I mentioned though, I consider Mesmer the third tier 1 class along with Guardian and Warrior. Mesmer by itself, it brings a lot of things that Guardian and Warrior are lacking, which you use to complete basically the trifecta for speedrunning dungeons. Those three classes together They pretty much have everything that you currently need for Dungeons and Fractals, and they probably do it the best out of all the classes, even if other classes can fill some of the same roles. So that is why I currently have guides for these 3 classes, and it's what we run in guild and organized groups. But hopefully this helped out, and thanks for watching.